tetragrammaton.
When I was 12 years old, my mum was an antique dealer, and there was always boxes of totty junk around the house. And in one of the boxes was a little paperback book called Led Zeppelin by Howard Milett. And I actually have a copy of it here.
Fantastic. I'd like to see it.
And it was in the bottom of a book, and I didn't know who they were. I found the story really inspiring because it's 4 very different guys that as little boys have this idea of doing music, and they kind of pursue this dream, each in their different ways. 2 of them becoming session musicians and working right in the belly of the beast,
Yeah.
and the other 2 as West Midlanders who, are kind of ostracized by the London music scene.
So you were not a Led Zeppelin fan when you read the
I
book?
didn't know who they were.
Yeah.
Never heard a note of their music.
So the book really was your introduction?
Yeah. I found out years later when this film came out and I was meeting aficionados.
Yes.
They said this guy was one of the few people the group were close and friendly with.
Interesting.
And he had lots of access to them. They didn't collaborate on the book, but he was around.
Yes.
And there's a tiny number of people that were allowed into sort of the Zeppelin inner circle.
Mm-hmm.
And he was one of them. And so there was a real sense of who these people were. And then I subsequently got into the group's music and started thinking, well, let's listen to this music.
Do you remember what was the first thing you heard of theirs?
Led Zeppelin 4
Mm-hmm.
was the first thing. And then I went back to 3, then to 2, then to 1. And then I went forward the other way to House of the Holy.
Mm-hmm.
But Zeppelin 4 was the first thing I heard, and I played it. And I remember being completely jaw-dropped at the end of When the Levee Breaks. And I went, who put this onto this piece of plastic? How is this even done?
Yeah.
It seems so beyond what I would hear 4 people doing in a room.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at the label that said produced by Jimmy Page. And I went, oh, I guess that's the alchemist that made this.
What was your musical taste like before that?
My friend's older brother was into The Clash, so I used to play that first Clash album obsessively.
Punk rock is happening when you're growing up.
Yes, yeah.
So by the time that you got interested in them, they were already gone. It was from the past.
Yes, but there was a connection. When my mum saw me reading this book for the second time, she said, do you remember this gentleman used to come round to the house and he would talk to you and you'd sit on his knee, and he was always trying to buy antiques from me and our fireplace specifically. And I said, yeah. And I remember this guy. She said, that's the manager of that group, Peter Grant. He used to come to our house.
What were your memories of Peter Grant from childhood?
Huge guy.
Yeah.
Very imposing.
Yeah.
Had a sort of Fu Manchu beard. And very, very friendly to me as a kid. And my
Would you say he was imposing just by his physicality or by his demeanor?
But the interesting thing is, he resembled a lot of antique dealers that would buy from my mum. A lot of them looked like him.
Yeah.
So he was not atypical, even though he's very striking when you see these pictures. I'd seen other guys with that appearance. So he used to come and my mum had been recommended to him, as my mum was like an entry-level antique dealer. She would buy things and have a stall in Camden Passage. Mm-hmm. So he'd heard from another dealer down the road that you could get really good deals from my mum before the stuff went into Regent Street in these expensive stores. So he'd show up. My dad came home from teaching at Imperial College one day and saw Peter leaving the house, and he parked his car out of view around the corner. It was a Silver Shadow Rolls Royce. So my mum then found out what it was he did, and he confessed he was the manager of Led Zeppelin. But I remember him always trying to buy the fireplace in our living room, and he said he wanted it for his daughter's bedroom. It was a rather lovely Art Nouveau fireplace, and my mum refused to sell it to him. So when I took my mum for afternoon tea last month, I was asking, I said, did I remember all this stuff about Peter Grant correctly? And she said, yes. And he said, yes. And I said, and I'm the only person that ever said no to Peter Grant.
So you read the book,
Mm-hmm.
and then what happens next in your personal Led Zeppelin experience?
So,
you listen to 4, you go back to 1, and then you get through the catalog. And are you, would you say, lifelong fan from there on? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I completely fell in love with it. And I think one of the things that enhanced my love for it was knowing about who they were and how they put it together.
Yeah. So the book really informed you.
Oh, the book was hugely influential on my life. It's probably one of the 2 most influential books on how I do things as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
Because the book was about when you're a child, you have this light within you. We all have it. And it's like this flame that burns inside you. And you hopefully find a direction for that passion. And in my case, it was film. In their case, it was music. And it strikes me as you go through life, you have to protect that flame against people that will try and snuff it out. And then as you go into the commercial world, we have to find ways to protect it against the business forces that come in. So they have Peter Grant that sort of shields them in this bell jar.
Yeah.
And so I only realized, and I was thinking about this at the end of Becoming Led Zeppelin, I asked Jimmy, please give a message to your 13-year-old self and other 13-year-olds out there. What can we learn from this journey? Yeah. And he paused a minute. He looks to me and looks straight at me. He says, if you have something different inside of yourself, you have to work and work and work. But if your aim is true, you can achieve your dreams.
Yes.
I believe this can be done because this is what happens. He's talking about the inner light, you know, inside of himself. And so I think what impressed me about this was these guys, they kind of were fueling that. And it was these people that they don't waste a minute. Each member of Led Zeppelin, they are never sitting on the sofa or doing the equivalent and looking at their telephones. They are constantly out there interacting with people. And I found that very inspiring. So with Jimmy and John Paul Jones, they're doing all these studio sessions. And every single job that comes up, they'll take it, you know. So when Mickey Mouse says to John Paul Jones, do you do arrangements? He goes, yeah, all the time, like this. And he figures out how to do it on the hoof. Yeah. Or Jimmy goes into the studio and he's wandering into the control room and trying to figure out how they're getting reverb, how they're making this effect. So they're learning everything. And the same with John Bonham and Robert. Even though the London music scene is shutting them out, they're literally in countless groups. I mean, took me almost a year making the film to even figure out tracking all the things they did. Yes. It's so complex, all the different groups they're in. And the main thing is they're using every second. They're not wasting a moment. And then when that first meeting happens, this is so true of life, and they're in that rehearsal space in Gerrard Street, and they start playing Train Kept a Rolling, they know what it is they've got. All that time, all that interaction with countless people, all those experiences they've thrown themselves into, they recognize what that moment is.
And the only way they could really know how special it was because of all the work they had done leading up to it.
Correct.
This was different than all of the other things they had been doing.
Yeah.
And they had been doing some really good things.
Yeah. So when I was a kid, you know, I was lucky. I got thrown into cinema. My dad banned television, so I wasn't able to watch TV as a small child, which is probably one of the best things he ever did. He just wanted us to become academics, his kids.
What was your father?
He taught at Imperial College, hydrodynamics. So he was like an engineer and a scientist, very intellectual guy, an inspiring man. But I wanted to work in the arts from a very small age. And so when my next door neighbor, as a birthday present for mowing her lawn, when I was about 7, she bought me tickets to my first cinema show, which when I got to the cinema, I realized it was Harold Lloyd's silent comedy, Safety Last, with an old lady accompanying on piano. Well, to a 7-year-old, if you've never seen a movie before, this is like mind-blowing, with him hanging off the clock tower.
It's amazing.
And so that stayed with me. And then a month later or 2, my mum took me to my next cinema show, which was a giant Odeon in Streatham, which was held 2,700 people and was totally packed. It was a rerun of Gone with the Wind.
Wow.
So those are my first 2 films that I saw in a cinema, and so my mind was blown. And then I got a VHS about the making of Gone with the Wind, narrated by plumber, and I must have watched that about 150 times. It was all about how the film was made. And it was so complex and nail-biting. And then my next door neighbor, she had David Niven's book, The Moon is the Balloon, which are all these vignettes about Hollywood. Each one a chapter on a legendary Hollywood character he was meeting with. And I went, I want to work in that world. It's absolutely fascinating. So that was my background. And this somehow related to Zeppelin. It was that thing of experience.
At what point did you decide, I want to make a Led Zeppelin movie? When did that happen?
Okay, so we made a series of 4 films called American Epic that we did with Robert Redford narrating and producing. And
that's the history of American music?
It was on the first electrical sound recordings of the first blues, country, gospel. So it's essentially where all contemporary music today comes from.
And where did the idea for that one come from?
I had become very interested in those early 20s recordings. So the background to this is the film codifies this period that really hasn't been understood. And essentially in 1926, the majority of music sold in America was in the big cities like Chicago, New York, Boston. And it was light classical, show tunes, big band jazz, this kind of thing. Radio exploded in 25, 26. And within a year or so, record sales in America dropped by 80%.
I didn't know this.
Most people don't.
Yeah.
And so kind of familiar to people that lived at the end of the 20th century with Napster. So all these people in the city were like, we'll just play radio now. And, so the record companies went into a panic and they thought, we're going to be out of business. They came up with the idea, why don't we record poor people in rural America? So they realized quickly that the rural American people would not buy what they were selling in the cities. But they were confident there was a market there because most of the rural communities didn't have electricity in their homes. They thought, well, we don't have to worry about radio, and we can sell them these little wind-up record players. So they organized talent contests across the whole of the South, saying Columbia Records will be in Johnson City on February the 1st, 1927. If you want to be immortalized in a phonograph record, be here. And literally thousands of people traveled hundreds of miles. And it coincided with the invention of the first electrical recording equipment. So the first microphone, the first amplifier, which they all packed into these enormous trucks. And they traveled with like trucks filled with wet cell batteries that would power all this stuff. And then a pulley driven lathe because
this is pre-tape. They went straight to disc.
Straight to disc, cutting to a wax disc. The wax discs from these recordings were then shipped in ice back to the pressing plants in New Jersey, where they would then be plated and the 78s would be recorded. This was like this golden time that people like Frank Zappa talk about, where the people running the industry don't understand what the music is.
Yes.
And this is when the most creative things happen.
Case, actually.
Yes. And you would be certainly an individual would have ridden the crest of a whole wave of music that people in the industry, when you were starting Def Jam, would be going, what the hell's this?
Yes.
But you had some instinct for it and some connection with these artists. And there was this golden point when you were breaking through this stuff where the suits did not understand what this was.
Not only did they not like it, they thought it wasn't music.
Right, okay.
That's how foreign it was.
And so this is the best time, artistically, isn't it? This is the greatest time. And all they know is Rick's bringing in this non-music rubbish.
That people seem to like.
But they're buying it.
Yeah.
So we'll Karen pressing it for him,
Yeah.
And make money off it. The moment they think they understand it and they have ideas, it's over.
Yeah, they ruin it.
They ruin it, yeah. So in this case, the record companies, they're coming in and there's this Cajun music from Louisiana, the Bro Frères. And they're like, what the hell's this? But it's selling. Lydia Mendoza with the Tejano music. Don't know what it is, but it's selling. And the blues music from Mississippi and the country. These records started selling hundreds of thousands of copies. And what was a total surprise to the record companies was that the Memphis Jug Band, that would be the first that would be the prototype of hip hop. I had Nas in American Epic doing one of their tracks, and it literally is a hip hop song, On the Road Again. And he says, God, I didn't realize this went back to 1927.
Yeah. And the Grateful Dead based their whole trip on jug bands as well. They grew out of jug bands.
Correct. Yeah. So these records started being ordered. The big surprise was the records being recorded in Memphis were being ordered in Illinois, in Massachusetts,
and they
in New
weren't
York
expecting
State.
that. They thought it would be local for the community, but the records traveled.
Yeah. And so I described it as the first time America heard itself.
Yes, beautiful.
And I took it to Robert Redford, and he said, this is America's greatest untold story, and I'll help you get this made.
Fantastic.
So it was 3 films traveling through, filming in 38 states and telling the untold stories of 9 key musicians, all from totally different backgrounds.
Name one of your favorite tracks from the first.
Oh, from the first
film.
episode?
Yeah.
Probably On the Road Again by the Memphis Jug Band.
Let's listen.
Black woman, tell you the reason why. Black woman, people do things on the sly. No. You look for your supper to be good and hot. She never put a neck bone in the pot. She's on the road again. Lord, a nasty born Eastman on the road. She's on the road again. Lord, a nasty born Eastman on the road again. I went to my window was propped. I went to my door was locked. I stepped right back, I shook my head. A big black nigga in my folding bed. I shot through the window, I broke the glass. I never seen a little nigga run so fast. He's on the road again. Lord, a nasty born Eastman on the road. He's on the road again. Lord, a nasty born Eastman on the road again. Your friend come to your house.
That's from what year?
1928.
Wow. Amazing. And you tell the story of them.
Yeah. It's the first time their stories have ever been told on film.
Beautiful.
So I have footage of them that hadn't been seen before, images. They've never been, before we made the film, this is one of the most influential African-American groups of all time. You could make a case they're the very first American pop group.
Yeah.
Yeah, really unbelievably powerful music, amazing story.
In a world of artificial highs and harsh stimulants, there is something different, something clean, something precise. Athletic nicotine. Not the primitive products found behind convenience store counters, not the aggressive buzz that leaves you jittery, but a careful calibration of clean energy and focused clarity. Athletic nicotine, the lowest dose tobacco-free nicotine available, made entirely in the USA. No artificial sweeteners, just pure, purposeful elevation. Athletic nicotine is a performance nootropic. Athletic nicotine is a tool for shifting mindsets. Athletic nicotine is a partner in pursuit of excellence. Slow release, low dose, gradual lift, sustained energy, soft landing, inspired results. Athletic nicotine, more focus, less static. Athletic nicotine, more clarity, less noise. Athletic nicotine, more accuracy, less anxiety. Athletic nicotine, from top athletes pushing their limits to artists pursuing their vision. Athletic nicotine offers the lift you've been looking for. Learn more at athleticnicotine.com/tetra and experience next level performance with Athletic Nicotine.
Warning, this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical.
Tell me about looking for the archival material. If it sounds like this is all lost material.
Yeah. It was all lost. There's nothing in the Smithsonian or the Library of Congress.
How do you start out First of all, how do you know what to look for? And then when you know what to look for, how do you find it?
So first off, in the period, I realized this was the wellspring where everything came from, these recordings. And the ones I was familiar with, I went, without this, none of these acts that we know today would exist. You know, it's all codified then. So I was like, well, how do I tell these stories? So the first thing I did was I got about 100 acts whose records were so impactful to me that I thought, I'm going to research all 100 of these people and then pick out what are the greatest stories. And so the 100 acts you can find that we did with Sony, a box set called the American Epic Collection, and it's 100 songs on a 5 CD set of what I consider to be the greatest recordings were made in those extraordinary recording sessions that Columbia and Victor and Paramount did.
And were most of those things out of print?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Long out of print.
Long out of print, yeah. So I'll give you an example of one of the stories in the film. To discover what the greatest records are, I went to a group of 78 collectors, and I'd be traveling to their houses across America. Richard Nevins, he's out in New Jersey. It was John Tefteller, the legendary blues collector in Oregon. And then Michael Kiefer, one of the greats of across the board, all genres from that era collector based in Los Angeles. And I would spend days in their house pulling 78s off the shelves.
Would they turn you on to things?
Yeah. And they would go, you got to hear this, or you got to hear this. And so there was a whole bunch of things that have never been reissued on CD, you know, in any form. And I was just collecting the ones that just blew my mind. I was looking for things that I thought anyone today that heard this piece of music would stop them in their tracks and go, what the hell was that? Who are they? So I'm looking at these 100 acts, and so one of the ones was in the gospel area, was this 1927 recording called My Heart Keeps Singing by Elder Birch and Congregation. And it has this wonderful, incredibly familiar sound to me that when I played the Taj Mahal, he goes, no, that's West Indian. That's the whole West Indian thing going on there. And it was just credited to Elder Birch and Congregation, My Heart Keeps Singing. And I just loved this track. No one knew anything about who this person was. And this track had been reissued on a number of CD compilations and was highly regarded. So Victor, that put it out, is owned by Sony BMG. So I went to the Sony BMG archives with the help of Adam Block at Legacy, who let me just wander around. They had all the recording sheets that the engineers would type up at these remote sessions they were doing, field sessions. It had the Elder Birch sheet from 1927. It said, Elder Birch, Cheraw, South Carolina. So I got on a plane to Cheraw, South Carolina.
So this is the first bit of information.
That's all I've got.
You've got the name of a city.
And I have no idea if this is his town.
And it's 100 years ago that you're looking for information.
Yes.
In this little town from 100 years ago.
Yes. So I go to this little town, and the first place you go is the library. They'll always be fascinated with an English person turning up, wanting to know about some record made almost 100 years ago. It really gets librarians going. That's why libraries are so important.
Yeah.
Other than these internet things, they're much more important because there are people that care about this stuff. So I arrive and they're completely baffled. They've never heard of this Elder Birch. And then I meet all the various white dignitaries in the town. Fascinated, but don't know who he is. And eventually I get sent over the tracks to the African-American part of the town. And I'm introduced to this elderly gentleman, Ted Bradley, who's in his 80s. His eyes start welling up and he goes, Elder Birch, my God, I haven't heard that name in years. He goes, yeah, he had a big store. I used to buy popsicles from him. And he describes the church he had. He built the church, this Triumph Sanctified church, with his bare hands. And he said, and we would all sit outside the church and listen to the music. And he said, the white people used to all drive up in their cars, this is in the 20s, and sit outside the church and listen to this extraordinary music. And he said Birch was one of the founders of the NAACP in South Carolina. Big force in this. And he goes, but you know who Elder Birch really influenced? And I said, no. And he goes, the kid that lived 2 doors up from his church and would hear that music from his bedroom all Sunday long. I said, who is that? He goes, Dizzy Gillespie.
Wow. That's amazing. Let's listen to that track.
Yeah.
Ever since my sin, ever since my sin, been taken away, my heart keeps singing, singing, singing on all the time. Since Jesus was, in His love, my heart keeps singing, singing, singing all the time. He taught me how to ever watch and pray, and now I live rejoicing every day. Since Jesus was in His love, my heart keeps singing, singing, singing all the time. I'm sanctified in the Holy Ghost, my heart keeps singing, singing, singing all the time. Since Jesus was in His love, my heart keeps singing, singing, singing all the time. Ever since my sin is taken away, my heart keeps singing, singing, singing all the time. Since Jesus was.
Incredible.
Beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful. So he brings me over to the Triumph Church, and it's still standing, the little
Really?
old church that Birch built.
Wow.
And the preacher's there, the current preacher, Donnie Chapman. And if there is a definition of spirituality, it's that preacher that I met, Donnie Chapman. Whenever there's some terrible wreck on the freeway and there's someone dying, he gets a call, 4 a.m, he's there, and he's tending to that person. And so I came in and we filmed there, and I found all these people in the town, the African Americans that remembered Birch and the impact he had. And then Dizzy Gillespie's cousin came in, and he had all Dizzy's notes for his autobiography, in which he'd written about how absolutely all his musical inspiration came from going to Elder Birch's church every weekend and listening to that music. That was what inspired him.
Amazing.
It all came from that, the rhythms, the sound, and the thing. And so the Triumph Church is part of a small sanctified movement across America called Triumph. And so all the best singers came to that tiny little village, and in the film, we had them perform My Heart Keeps Singing in this unbelievably rousing, wild performance. Yeah, brought his memory back, So these are stories like this. So this was the guy that, they kind of chased the Ku Klux Klan out of Chiror, And this was music unifying this community. I mean, this was in the depths of segregation. And yet, as I said, all the white people would be open around that church on the Sunday, just listening to that music.
Do you think the fact that your first cinema experience was a Harold Lloyd with a live pianist, that for you, music and film are just intertwined? Your love of it, they go together.
That's a very perceptive observation. I fundamentally think that's true. Yeah, I've never thought about that. Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. Yes, I see visuals and live music performance as being absolutely intertwined.
Yeah.
God, I'm really glad I came here today. That's really clever. That's absolutely, yeah. Because it was a very physical experience, There's this extraordinary imagery, but this woman, she's improvising.
Yeah.
There's no score. When you go to those silent movie things, if you do meet people that do that, they improvise the music. I think the studios occasionally would send over some general cues. It was very rare that you'd have a whole score that was sent out. Yeah, I think you're right. And so I think that music and film are incredibly closely related. I think that a movie has to work like a symphony with movements. And the whole thing has to tie together. There needs to be themes that appear. So, when you have a musical, there'll be an overture at the beginning where they play you all the highlighted, like South Pacific, the highlighted, the key melody lines, so that when you get into it, you kind of go, oh, I know that,
Do you think that coming from the UK was advantageous to see it with new eyes?
Yes.
Looking at American music with new eyes?
Yes, I think there's a number of things I realized. This research was hugely enjoyable because they're very, very kind and welcoming people in rural America. But they're particularly fascinated if you're coming in from Britain and you're coming into some tiny town and you're interested in this cultural thing that happened almost 100 years ago. Particularly if a lot of them aren't even familiar that this person is there. So I would sometimes meet family members of musicians whose songs have been covered by Bob Dylan and Johnny Cash, and they had no idea.
Wow.
They had no idea that their dad's music had made that impact. Firstly, when you go into the rural areas of the South, you see huge amounts of old England there. So it's actually very familiar.
Yeah.
Because these are settlers that went over, and sometimes...
And Scotland and Ireland.
Yes. And I'm half Irish, so yeah.
And that's the roots of country music.
It's the roots of blues. Taj Mahal told me blues is the combination. So this is Taj's thing, and I think he's right. He said blues is the combination of African music with Irish folk music. It's those elements combined. That's how he sees it. And I can't think of anyone that's been more deep plugged into that history than him.
Yeah. It's also interesting that after the American project, you go on Led Zeppelin, who are so totally influenced by American music. There is no English music in their vocabulary.
No.
It's a representation of America from far away, and it takes it to an extreme that most Americans would not take it to because they know too much to amplify it that much.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? In some ways, the freedom that comes with this foreign thing that you can interpret and make it yours. In their minds, maybe they think this is how it is in America, but really it's because their love of this foreign thing is so extravagant in their minds, they take it to this extravagant place where it never was before.
I think that's a very sage observation. There's this huge romanticization of America and American music.
Yeah, it's like spaghetti Western movies, same thing. It's like
absolutely
the idea of taking it to this extreme, this poetic extreme.
Yeah, absolutely. That is why, if you look at that generation and the subsequent generations, the love of the original rockabilly, the rock and roll music, there's nowhere more fervent than Britain for the adoration of that. It's hugely romanticized. And similarly, the blues.
Yes.
The blues is just massively romanticized in Britain.
And jazz as well.
And
jazz in Europe. Jazz,
yes, you're right.
American jazz in Europe is much more popular today than it is in America.
Yeah. Yeah, because, when James Reese Europe came in the First World War with the Harlem Hellcats and he brought jazz to the European battlefields, that's where the French fell in love with it.
Yeah.
So he's bringing in, those W.C. Handy songs and stuff like this. And the French were like, what the hell's this, And this was, I guess, music brought in to rouse the troops for the Americans. But to the French, this was exotic and exciting. The Zeppelin story came out. We made American Epic. We made these 3 historical films. And the 4th film, our sound engineer that worked on Zeppelin rebuilt from original parts the full recording lathe, the amplifier and the microphone. So we brought a whole group of artists in to record for the first time in almost 100 years exactly how you would have done in 1927.
Beautiful.
And they all had to come in, do it live to the wax disc.
Yes.
And then we pressed up the records.
Fantastic.
The first 3 films were the history of the Carthaginian Wars. And then the 4th film was like, we film a group of people crossing the Alps on the elephants, and doing it ourselves. So this film, I wanted to do one more music film that picked up from where American Epic left off, which would be sort of World War II. And something that took us from World War II to, say, 1970. This felt like a very, very exciting arc in communication and music. This is the arrival of tape and countless other things. And I thought, you know, it would be kind of good rather than researching 100 acts. And this area, my previous era, is super mysterious American epic. There's nothing known about most of these acts.
Mm-hmm.
Is there one act that rides that wave? I remembered that book I read when I was 12, and I went, Zeppelin. And no one's ever told their story before.
Yes.
They're as mysterious as the Memphis Jug Band.
Yes.
The record's all known.
It's one of the things that's so interesting about the old blues artists where there might be one photograph, you know, like Robert Johnson, there's one photograph.
Uh-huh.
Maybe. With Led Zeppelin, they made it a point to never put themselves on the covers.
Yeah.
They also had this mystery about them always.
Yeah.
You know, before them, the Beatles were always on their album covers.
Absolutely.
They were pop groups. But Led Zeppelin was something else.
Yeah. Zeppelin is surrounded with myth and conjecture.
Yes.
I remember as I got into Zeppelin's music after reading that book and totally falling in love with it, I remember talking to kids my age and contemporaries that were listening to it too, going back and listening to music, and thinking that my sense of what this group was different from theirs, having read this long out of print paperback book.
Yes.
And I realized that with Zeppelin, the story has been codified by books published in the 80s and beyond that are looking back. They're looking from John Bonham's death backwards.
Yes.
The interesting thing about this obscure little book that I read, that I said, long out of print, was it's looking forward.
Yes.
The end's in the mid-70s. The end is not written.
Yes.
So the whole perspective in the book is from the perspective of these children on this journey. And they haven't even reached the end of it by the time the book's printed. So my perspective on this was, thanks to that little paperback, it was very different. And this book ended with a world of possibilities.
As does the film.
Yeah. This is what you want in a movie. Is you want something, the purpose, I think, of a movie is to inspire people.
Yes.
I want them to walk out of the cinema and go, you know, I'm going to form a group. Or I'm going to apply these things to something I've learned or something I'm doing. Anything you can do that helps you when you leave the cinema, go, I figure this out. This is what I'm going to do. That's the highest goal you can have as someone that creates something.
And that's how the book influenced you. It wasn't so much about music. It was about following your inner light.
Yeah. It was like, how do you make music? Demystify. What are the things you knew to do creative things? Because what we all do in this creative field, we're craftsmen. And I think the great myth about this is people tout around words like genius and things like this and auteur, as if we're kind of certain people are touched by the hand of God.
Yeah.
My experience in what I do and looking at, say, Led Zeppelin, is that it's an enormous amount of hard work.
Absolutely.
Masses of incremental work that eventually becomes, it's so many bricks that eventually you have the Great Wall of China.
Yes.
And you're like, how the hell? You can see this thing from space. And it's the same here. And that's, I suppose, what people might term as genius. But it's very counterproductive to use those terms.
Yeah.
And so what I liked about this is it was showing you, the book was showing, and the film was showing you the practical things that you do. And then it lets the music play. You get to hear the music.
Another part of it is that you can only put in that time if you really love something.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to really love it. So I was looking at this follow-up and I said, this is the story. This is the story we've got to make after American Epic. I said, this group takes us through from Jimmy's born, and he's the oldest in 1944. So it takes you from World War II through to 1970. And I knew the exact point where I wanted the film to end, which would be with their homecoming at the Albert Hall. And so with all the films I do, I would never knock on someone's door and say, hey, I've got an idea, I want to do a film with you. In my mind, I have to work out exactly how I'm going to make that film. And can I do it? How would I do it? So with this, I spent about 8 months writing a script and tracking down archive. So
this is in preparation before you've ever talked to anyone in the group.
Yes.
And they could very easily say no.
Correct. I was aware going into it that they had never participated in a documentary.
Yes.
They had never, ever sat down and formally told their story in any form to a
Yes.
biographer or anything like that.
Yes.
So the received wisdom would absolutely be no.
Yes. So you spend 8 months putting together what you would do in a dream project that likely would not happen. Your mindset was, I'm making this film with
Yes.
these people.
Yes, that was my mindset.
And you've not met them, you don't know them.
Don't know them, no. In fairness, I had met Robert Plant. I'd been introduced to Robert Plant through a wonderful musician called Justin Adams, who discovered Tanara Wen and all those great groups.
Fantastic.
And Justin, that was through David James, the great music manager. And Justin had brought me backstage to meet Robert long before Epic was finished. And so Robert was familiar with our work. But I could tell what I knew of Robert Plant, that would have no impact on, other than he kind of knew American Epic. So I thought, But yeah, so hadn't met them, and certainly didn't met Jimmy or John Paul Jones.
So much of today's life happens on the web. Squarespace is your home base for building your dream presence in an online world. Designing a website is easy, using one of Squarespace's best-in-class templates. With the built-in style kit, you can change fonts, imagery, margins, and menus, so your design will be perfectly tailored to your needs. Discover unbreakable creativity with Fluid Engine, a highly intuitive drag-and-drop editor. No coding or technical experience is required. Understand your site's performance with in-depth website analytics tools. Squarespace has everything you need to succeed online. Create a blog, monetize a newsletter, make a marketing portfolio, launch an online store. The Squarespace app helps you run your business from anywhere. Track inventory and connect with customers while you're on the go. Whether you're just starting out or already managing a successful brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create and customize a beautiful website. Visit squarespace.com/Tetra and get started today.
Prior to this project coming to be, what do we know about the relationship between those three people at that point in time, before you reached out?
It was apparent to me that of all the groups, the major acts, and they've got to be like in the top 3, haven't they? No one does less publicity than they do.
Yeah, none.
They do none.
Yes.
I mean, I think when the last big series of reissues came out with the double LPs and the CDs, I don't think Robert Plant or John Paul Jones did a single interview or post of any kind in their social media.
The last 2 things I remember anyone doing were there was a concert that was filmed and recorded where they changed the way the songs were presented.
Oh, yes. That was Robert and Jimmy.
And that was sometime maybe in the 80s or
90s. I actually saw that show.
How was it?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Pure chance. Friend had a spare ticket. It was no media. And it was, I knew someone. They said, do you want to come? So it was all these interesting things. I'd actually got lucky and seen these things. I was actually too young to have seen Zeppelin. So all these things that kind of were pointing the way, this is your film, And then, I got a last minute ticket to see the O2 show as well.
Yeah. And the O2 show also, there was no publicity. There was one show. It was announced. They did the show and that was it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's fantastic. That's what I love about them.
Yeah.
Is they don't do any of that stuff. I mean, the thing that's exciting about Zeppelin is what I've often wondered, apart from the musicianship, which is, when I say apart from the extraordinary musicianship and the songwriting production, is I think what makes them very exciting is when they appeared in '69 as the Beatles were essentially falling apart.
Yes.
This group appears that literally has no Beatles in its DNA whatsoever.
Yeah.
And of all the big groups, even Pink Floyd, there's elements of Beatles in there.
Yes.
There's zero Beatles in the Zeppelin, to my ears.
Yes.
And I think that was what the public needed and wanted after this massive, almost decade-long infatuation, influence of the Beatles. This group appears that is so different in its DNA that it caught their interest, you know.
There's a moment in the film where you show the album chart with Led Zeppelin #1 and Beatles #2. And I'll say, it's a shocking thing to see because the Beatles are still the Beatles.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. You know, as you said, a hugely important and fantastic group. And yet Zeppelin is so different in every
way. I love Jimmy says in the movie, he played on everybody's records except the Beatles.
There's like no Beatles connection.
Yeah.
And as you say, he
so interesting.
Played with everyone. It's like, it's almost like it's destiny. This thing is, you know. And those things are exciting things where something comes in and it's the polar opposite of whatever dominated the thing for 10 years. Those are the things that are exciting. But they're the most difficult things to break through because nobody in the business gets it.
Yeah, there's no point of reference for it. Yeah, it's brand new.
The
it's
media,
revolutionary.
by and large, can't stand them.
Yes.
You know, no record company in Britain was interested in paying in advance for them. Incredible when you listen to that album.
Yeah.
You know, if you talk to Glyn Johns, which I did extensive background interviews, he brought that lacquer of album 1 and played it to all the prominent people in the music business. He told me he played to Mick Jagger to potentially get them on the Rolling Stone circuit. Jagger didn't get it at all, he said, and hired Jethro Tull instead. Yeah, he played it certainly to George Harrison. I can't remember if he played it to other Beatles and Pete Townsend. He played it to all these people.
Same thing happened with the Beatles.
Right. Yes, exactly.
Nobody would sign the Beatles either.
Get it. Exactly. Yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah. It was like rock bands are finished, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's over. Because they were kind of like they had that Motown thing they loved, but they were really a throwback to their big things were, you know, the Crickets, and Carl Perkins, those songwriting rockabillys.
Yeah.
That's what they liked. And that was considered in late 1962, that was considered completely out of date, wasn't it? Yeah. God knows what those record companies are wanting to throw us into, you know? I mean, wasn't it all Bobby Darin, all this kind of, it was definitely going super middle of the road, wasn't it? I think that's what the industry wanted. I think the industry wanted to get rid of these drug-taking, pot-smoking rockabilly musicians and replace them with entertainers again, you know?
What do you think made Led Zeppelin?
It's the sheer technical ability of these 4 master musicians. I can say that having made this film, it's been, you know, years editing this film, and however tricky it was to get it to the film it is now, in terms of like the way it's sequenced, when the performances would play in the edit bay, every single time I heard them, my heart would jump for joy at how amazing they sounded. I never got bored of that music. I was never less than elated when that music came in. So it's a combination of like, from the ground up, you know, Bonham's drumming, absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, he's a jazzer. He's a jazzer with strong love of soul music. Yeah. He's not a rocker. He's not on the 4 at all. Everything swings with Bonham. So the first thing you've got is a rhythm section that swings. And I think that's so many of the groups that want to be inspired by Led Zeppelin, unfortunately don't get it. That what makes Zeppelin works is the rhythm section swings.
Yeah. People mistake Led Zeppelin for heavy metal.
Yeah. And it's totally not.
Something else.
And then you move to John Paul Jones, who literally told me he did not understand what rock music was, as it was in the late, 60s. This is not his thing at all. So he comes in with a whole different. So you listen to these things like Good Times, Bad Times, the opening track. I mean, he's playing like Motown style bass lines on these songs. I mean, no rock bass player would think of playing what he plays. Yeah. So he's got him with John Bonham. So you have Bonham's extraordinary patterns. His drumming is so sophisticated, it showed up technical flaws in how every movie is delivered to the cinema. I could hear errors in the way that the DCP, which is the thing you'd listen to, the way that had been packaged, because Bonham's drumming is so sophisticated. It shows up if things aren't in sync.
Yeah.
You know? Then you got Jonesy coming in, weaving in and out of that with his extraordinary imagination. Again, this is a guy that's played on countless types of music. And then Jimmy. I mean, we opened the film, the second song you hear is the Johnny Bennett Trio, Train Kept a Rolling. And I got an original 45 of that, you know, and it just, the sound of that is so ferocious. It's so exciting. There's no drums on it. It's a double bass, electric and rhythm guitar and a vocal. And I think, talking to Jimmy, that track is like a total touchstone for him. So you have Elvis in Memphis, and he was working for an electrical company, and he was the driver, and the electrician was Johnny Bennett. So these two guys are in a truck together. And Elvis goes to Sun and does the sessions with Sun with this wonderful sort of soaring voice. And Johnny is the hardcore feral rockabilly, and he does those initial records for Coral, like Train Kept a Rolling. I mean, that's about as aggressive as you can get. And I think this is Jimmy's meat, that sound.
Yes.
I remember playing Howling Wolf with him, and he was like, oh, he just, his face lights up, that kind of real feral, edgy, raw. So you got that in there. And then he was showing me at his house, Jimmy, he had this collection of like early Arabic music. These are records from the 50s that he had as a kid. So this is sitar music. And these are rare records, but they were put out, you know, on his master's voice. And you could tell these are the original copies he'd had from childhood.
Yes.
So that whole Eastern music thing, he was into that from his childhood. So all that's in the mix, you know? And he has this enormously broad session career. And then Robert had sung in almost every style you could imagine before Zeppelin. He's like a troubadour, you know?
Yeah.
So he'd been a mod, he'd been a soul singer, he'd been a Tom Jones type singer.
Yeah.
As he said, throwing it against the wall, seeing if it sticks. But there was this big passion for blues. And just before Zeppelin, you know, I came across all these recordings he'd made with Alexis Corner, who's like the father of British blues. And it's Robert singing, and you can hear this sort of template emerging, and this different voice emerges. He's doing all these things, but you know, he describes in the film, you know, that as a kid going to see Sonny Boy Williamson on the American folk blues tour at the Birmingham Town Hall was like a life-changing experience. And so I think it's the combination of these guys coming together with all their different interests, and the fact that unlike most groups, they're meeting as relative strangers in that room. You know, Plant and John Bonham knew each other and they played in some groups together. But as Robert says, you know, John Bonham's lovely wife had said, don't play with that planter. Don't go near him. He's a disaster. So they were kind of like, you know, this was a sort of almost a covert
it's so
operation.
funny because we think of Bonham as the outlaw character in the band, but it was Robert.
Yeah, I think Robert's the most outlawish. He's the most outlawish. He was the one, he was thrown out of his house by his parents.
Yeah.
You know, so the great thing also about the Zeppelin story is if you're a kid and you're setting out on your journey, whatever that journey might be, and you have something you want to do that is not what your school or your parents are telling you should be doing, whatever it might be, you are one of the 4 members of Led Zeppelin on that journey. So
they're archetypes.
They're archetypes. So John Paul Jones, his parents are vaudeville entertainers. So they're in the theatre business. The only difference is that John Paul Jones's father thinks bass guitar's a novelty instrument. In 2 years' time, it will never be heard of again. Get yourself a saxophone, you'll always work. It's my favourite line in the film. I just love it.
Very funny.
And he goes, no, Dad, I want bass guitar. He'd heard Shaking All Over by Johnny Kidd and the Pirates, and the bass thundering through the jukebox. And he goes, that's what I want to play. And so, you know, he goes on that journey with so he grew up literally standing on the wings of these shows. Then you have Jimmy, who's I relate to a lot because his mother, like mine, was very supportive of his music. And all his school friends that he introduced us to remembered Patricia, his mum, as like encouraging them to rehearse in the living room. And whereas Jimmy's father was more like, get your studies done. What's all this guitar business? But the mother saw something and she encouraged it. And then you have John Bonham, whose parents are neutral. Like as long as you're paying for your kid and your wife, that's fine with this music thing. But there's always a job for you at the family building firm. And then the other end of the spectrum is Robert Plant, where parents want him to be a chartered accountant. And when it emerges he doesn't want to do that, they throw him out of the house.
Yeah.
So if you're a kid, you are one of those archetypes.
Yeah.
That's all the 4 points in the compass. So that's another thing about the story that struck me, is its usefulness. I thought everyone has an entry point into this story.
Yeah.
You're one of those kids. You've got the support of both parents, one parent, neutral, or no support.
Yeah.
You're one of them. And so those are the things I'm interested in the film, that like, what's the meaning? So none of this film was ever approached from the point of, oh, this could make a lot of money. It never entered my mind. I just remember I loved this when I was 12, and boy, would this music make an extraordinary score for a movie.
Yeah.
You know? So I had the South Pacific story, which is, in South Pacific, it's like this thing about racial harmony. And in Led Zeppelin, it's a story of a quest. And we had songs every bit as good as Barley High or Happy Talk with Zeppelin, Dazed and Confused. So you got this amazing story that's illustrated by Communication Breakdown,
Yeah.
A Whole Lot of Love, Ramble On. So to me, it was like, that was what I was thinking. I was thinking of it like a musical. Like I wanted to make a film that I could go to the Brixton Ritzy like I used to when I was a teenager, and I could watch it 3 times a year.
Yes.
That was the whole thought in my head. I wanted to make that kind of film, and with the best sound possible, and take
you
it.
have it. It's insane how it sounds. It's so good.
LMNT, Element Electrolytes. Have you ever felt dehydrated after an intense workout or a long day in the sun? Do you want to maximize your endurance and feel your best? Add Element Electrolytes to your daily routine. Perform better and sleep deeper. Improve your cognitive function. Experience an increase in steady energy with fewer headaches and fewer muscle cramps. Element Electrolytes. Drink it in the sauna. Refreshing flavors include grapefruit, citrus, watermelon, and chocolate salt. Formulated with the perfect balance of sodium, potassium, and magnesium to keep you hydrated and energized throughout the day. These minerals help conduct the electricity that powers your nervous system so you can perform at your very best. Element Electrolytes are sugar-free, keto-friendly, and great tasting. Minerals are the stuff of life. So visit drinklmnt.com/tetra and stay salty with Element Electrolytes. LMNT.
Tell me when you first met Jimmy Page.
So I'd done all this research, got a storyboard together. And so storyboard is where you create the film in pictures. So I'd written a script, and then I had this storyboard, a bound storyboard. And this is it here.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So it's got a bit tatty now, but this it's housed in this is a 1920s 78 RPM album. And I've taken the wallets out. And so I basically had the whole story depicted through. This is all their childhood.
It's a series of photographs.
Yeah.
Both of them and what was going on in their lives at that time.
Correct, exactly.
It's a young Jimmy Page.
Yeah, Lonnie Donegan.
Yeah.
Yeah, John Paul Jones. I hadn't tracked down the church yet.
Because John Paul Jones played organ in a church.
Yes. So I had this storyboard ready, and I reached out. I wrote to Jimmy Page and said I'd like to meet, and I didn't say why I wanted to meet. And a meeting was granted.
That's odd.
Yeah. And it transpired when I got to the meeting that he was very familiar with American Epic.
I see.
And had watched all the films, and he had the book and the soundtracks. There were 9 soundtrack albums.
Yeah.
All of this is because of American Epic, because of the work on that film. So I sort of sat down. He arrived with some like shopping bags, which he like a bunch of them, which he put down by the door. And we were in a hotel, and I pulled the storyboard out and said, look, I've got this film. And I started walking him through the storyboard. And he became very animated and was like making lots of observations as I was walking through. And it was very kind of meticulous. Like I remember I planned to maybe spend 2 hours doing this. It was 7 hours.
Wow.
Of just absolutely constant conversation. There was only a break in the middle before we went for afternoon tea up the road at the Orangery, which is where afternoon tea was invented.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we kept 7 hours going through, and like not stopping for breath. Just I'm walking through, and he's adding all these things and additional observations, and going, yes, and this was that, and every now and then he would just fire a question at me. So I think at one point I said, so this is the point where you travel up on Terry Reid's recommendation to go and see Robert Plant singing at a teacher's training colony, I think it was. And he turned to me and said, what was the name of the band he was in? And I'm like, Obstweedle. And he goes, very good, carry on.
Testing you.
As well he should, you know, as well he should. I mean, I would. So what happened here is the storyboard's like 100 pages of images, and there's not a single piece of text written on it.
So you're telling the story. You're looking at the images and explaining the story.
Yeah, so I have everything committed to memory.
Yeah.
Every date, every person, every place, it's all committed to memory. And so Jimmy, in this process, I mean, it was very enjoyable and engaging, but I realized afterwards that was 7 hours of memory.
Yes.
That I had to have. I couldn't look up anything. And so at one point I said to him, oh, such and such happened in May. And he sort of thought, he was like, I thought it was early June. And I went, no, I'm sure it's May, or something like this. And he went, let's check. And he went to the bags he'd brought, and he took out the bags and poured the bags over the contents of the bags. And it was all his diaries going back to 62.
Wow.
I brought a picture of it here to show you. And so this is that first meeting.
Amazing.
And those are the diaries in front of him.
Yeah, he looks happy.
Yes, yes. He's a really, really nice guy. He's a really, really nice person.
Describe his personality to me.
Super enthusiastic. I mean, total real love of music. Like, he opened up his address book and gave me the numbers of, like, he gave me the number of Rod Wyatt, who he was still very close to, who taught him his first chords on his guitar. And I met Rod, and Rod was this just wonderful kid. Still this kid. He was like approaching 80, but he was this kid. And he had this passion. And I recognized, and I met all Jimmy's friends, I went, he's got the same passion for music he did when he was 13, 14, 15. He's never lost it.
Yeah.
That thing of music he has is totally unjaded. And so when we would talk about things and we would talk about pieces of music that were entering the story, his eyes would light up when he was recording Johnny Burnett. He still feels the same way about the record like when he first heard it. So I think what I liked about him was just the joy, the excitement in it. There was no cynicism. When you're in the inner circle and you're just talking about the stuff, real enthusiasm.
Do you get the sense that he still plays?
Yes. I mean, he came out and did like a year ago, they were inducting Link Ray into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He came out and like completely unannounced and turned up and played Rumble, you know, at that, like a fucking champ. I mean, it's so powerful. I haven't asked him, like, do you sit and play? I mean, if I'm making a film with somebody, my relationship really centers around with them on the film.
Yes.
And so I kind of like to keep that relationship about the period that I'm covering. So if it's from childhood to 1970, I quite like to stay in that zone with the subject. Mm-hmm. So when they meet me, their head's totally in that zone.
Yes.
And so if you watch and you see the film, they're never in the film talking, looking at it now, this is what I think. I wished I'd known. They're in the moment. They're walking you through the film. They're living it in real time. Unless someone starts chatting away, which some of them do about things, I don't probe into like the day-to-day specifics of how he might play today or whatever. My view is that that's a whole other book.
Yeah,
you know?
the film is not who they are today. The film was a moment in time.
Yeah.
And we're living it with them.
Exactly. So the first thing I went through is when he's talking, the first thing I'm looking is like, I'm with this guy and he can see, you make an American for love. You don't make American Epic to make money.
Yeah.
You make it because it's an important story that needs to be told. And it's the last window before anyone that was there is dead.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that fueled Epic. And he could tell when I walked into that room that I actually loved this story. And I thought this story was meaningful and the world would be a better place, particularly for kids, if the true story of how this group did what they did was out there.
Yeah.
And I just saw all those sort of tabloidy books that were published in the 80s about, largely written by people that went on a jumbo jet with them for a day, a week or so, and hung out at some parties. Well, that's not how you get to from 1944 to 1970, that's a whole bunch of insane work to get you to that place. And so when I'm talking with him, what was really interesting, he was like, he just got really enthused. He was like literally brought back to that time as we were going through the pages. And because the film, as you see, is quite thorough in each of these stages, I thought I was probably talking to him for 2 or 3 hours before we even got to Gerrard Street.
Wow.
You know? So he was going so into this world. And what was nice, I think, for him was that I had learned all this stuff, or as much as I could. And so it became very collegial, and you'd be filling me in on things, going, well, actually, it was also this, and there was this. And so I could tell straight away he was collaborative.
Yes.
So the other thing that's really lovely about Jimmy Page is I know there's this sort of image of him as this sort of iconic guitarist. And of course, you know, on stage, you know, he is this. But the thing I thought was interesting meeting him, and is at the core of, I think, of the Zeppelin story, is he's actually a very collaborative person in my experience. So when he meets Robert Plant, who's this 19-year-old kid singing an Obstweedle, and it's just recommended by Terry Reid. He wouldn't have had any way of hearing Robert Plant. I mean, Robert had made some records, but it was so obscure. Yeah. Jimmy wouldn't have been able to get his
And Jimmy was already both a top studio musician and in the Yardbirds.
In the Yardbirds, absolutely.
Which were a significant band.
Yeah, and I met Shel Talmy, you know. I did about 170 interviews as background research for this film.
Wow.
I remember talking to Shel Talmy, and he said, if you were trying to make a contemporary record, and you couldn't get Jimmy Page or John Paul Jones, forget it. If you needed additional musicians to supplement a group because you didn't think the group was tight enough to play their first single or whatever.
So they were the sound of British music at that time.
Oh, yeah.
Unspoken.
Yes.
Behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But they were the sound already before Zeppelin.
Yeah, absolutely. They were the guys. And Shel Talmy said, it ain't happening if you don't have those guys on it.
Wow.
Unless you're trying to do some middle of the road. If you're trying to do something that's meant to sound contemporary, it's meant to be selling to a teenage audience, if you can't get those guys, forget it. That's how highly they were regarded. Yeah,
it was also remarkable hearing that the famous Telecaster was given to him by Jeff Beck.
Right. Yes. I think he told me that, they were childhood friends.
Yeah.
I think he said Jeff made a guitar himself. I don't know why I sort of thinking it was a bass. I can't remember. He made a guitar, and I had the impression it was quite crudely fashioned, you know. Yeah. So they go way back, and he said it was all about, they loved James Burton. They loved him. When I was a kid and I heard Believe What You Say, that single, good God, and that Burton solo rips out. You're like, is that even a human being playing this thing? It's just mind-boggling. So he said they were all like, let's hear your version of My Babe. And it would be in one of Ricky Nelson's tracks. So those kids, they were like, of the rock and roll records, James Burton was the real touchstone guitarist. And he doesn't get props, Ricky Nelson, now, but those records are amazing. And it's Burton, Burton's a guitarist on Susie Q. Wow. That's him, aged freaking 16 or something.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's James Burton.
Wow.
Dale Hawkins, the second ever concert I went to. Yeah, but anyway, so he goes up to see Robert Plant and obviously is impressed and invites him to his house in Pangbourne to try him out. And he, it's a well-known story. He says, I want to do a reinterpretation of this Joan Baez recording, Babe, I'm going to leave you. And I've got this idea for how to do it. And Plant sings and he's totally thrilled with it. And they both know this is something incredible. And at that point, he tells Robert, I've got this band together. And Robert's like, no. Whatever drummer you've got in mind, you've got to see this guy I know. And I think this tells you about Jimmy Page and why he's different from other people. He is the most experienced session musician in London.
He's played with all the greats, period.
Exactly. And he's in the Yardbirds, so he's been in the counterculture. He's seen all those musicians up on the West Coast. I mean, who's had more experience? Yet he listens to this 19-year-old kid and he goes to some gig with Tim Rose to watch this guy drumming. And I just think, how many people, if you're 24, whatever he was then, 24, and a 19-year-old that you think is a good singer, I said, you go, that's all right, kid. Because when you're 19, 24, that's a big age difference.
Yes.
And yet he listens to him. I think there's a lot that tells you about Jimmy Page, that he's got this incredible focused vision about what he wants to do. And I think this is the aspirational, but yet he's open to ideas. And so when I was going through with him, I felt he's a collaborator. And all he wants to know is that you're the right singer or you're the right filmmaker. Mm-hmm. So when it got to the end of the presentation, he said, how do you want to do this? And I said, well, I want to do it with everyone, all the band. And he goes, that's a bit more of a task, And he says, he said, well, you have to get the other two on board. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I'll help in any way I can, And I said,
he didn't speak for the others.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
No, it's very much like a kind of a democracy, and and he indicated this would not necessarily be easy. You know what I mean? Absolutely.
Yes.
And
but he would be supportive and helpful.
He'll be supportive.
What's the next step?
So I said, the other thing, Jimmy, is it needs to be an independent production. I'm making this as an important historical film. As you can see, I'm bringing it a full film together. I want to make a film focusing on music and this musical journey, this inspiration. He goes, so it needs to be an independent film. And he goes, that's fine. You make the film. And so from then on, I went to track down John Paul Jones. And he hadn't seen American Epic, so I sent a copy of the American Epic films to his manager and said, would you just ask him to watch 20 minutes of this?
Yeah.
And if he's not interested, you'll never hear from us again.
Yeah.
And I think it was a day or two later, I got a phone call and the manager says, he wants to meet you tomorrow.
Great.
If you're free.
Great.
And so we met at this club in Chiswick and I sat down with him. And that was a magical meeting because John Paul Jones is the most press shy, does the least amount of media of a group that does no media. And John Bonham even less.
Yes.
But John Paul Jones might have done the least media of any of them.
Yeah.
He doesn't feel any compunction to be like blathering to the press at all.
Yes.
So I'd done a huge amount of research on him and I was fascinated by his story. And so I sat down with him and started walking through the storyboard. And the first thing that struck me that I'd never seen in the few fragments of bits and pieces he's done was he's an incredibly charismatic guy. Really funny. I mean, you can see it in the film, can't you? I mean, he is a natural raconteur. And I was going, I have to say, I was looking from a filmmaker's point of view and I was going, this guy's absolute gold. This was him comfortable and relaxed in a private place. And I'm walking through and I'm talking through all these details about his childhood and his musical background. There's tons of stuff, like 2 hours before we get to the first Zeppelin rehearsal. And I'm into this. And you can see how I'm interested in this stuff. And so he's like piling in all. Now, he had lots of stuff that is not known because he's the most mysterious of any of the Zeppelin things. If you look online, before when we started this, there's not even a picture of his parents anywhere. Which is unheard of with an act of that magnitude.
Yes.
There's always little bits and pieces. He is an incredibly mysterious figure. So he's every bit as mysterious his life as the 1920s blues.
How would you say the meeting with John Paul Jones and Jimmy were different?
Jimmy's meeting was very focused on all the details that make up the whole.
Mm-hmm.
And Jimmy has this real attention to detail, like it's all the bricks make the giant castle.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's going through and you're talking through the whole film. And he's essentially trying to ensure that all the pieces are there.
Yes.
And if there's any additional things, he's going, "Oh, well, that led to this and this is to this. And then this is, So he's like checking all the wiring. John Paul Jones was more of a raconteur. And so he was like a great after dinner speaker. He would try and give you the feel of those times. So he was someone trying to evoke, like when he would talk about the vaudeville careers of his parents, he'd really try and bring you into those theaters with those acts. When he's playing his little band and he's chatting to this, because all those little bands, they'd play in youth clubs, and youth clubs were generally run by churches. And so this preacher comes up to him and says, "Do you play the organ?" And John plays a bit of piano. He kind of goes, "Oh, yeah," like this. And he says, "Well, we're looking for an organist, and we also need an organ." And Jonesy's just 14, just says, "I can get you an organ." And so the priest, who's actually a young priest, I think he's only like 24 or something, the Rev. Gordon Bates, I found out later. I tracked him down, the priest. He was still alive. He's now 90.
Wow.
The loveliest man. So he's the one, when I tracked him down, he provided all the photographs you see of the church with the congregation. Because that church that Jonesy goes to, it was bulldozed like a couple of years later in 64. I think he was there in about 61. And so all that stuff is like completely lost to time. And the Rev. Gordon Bates also had all these old cuttings, including a picture of Jonesy's first band, The Shadows, at the youth club. He had a photograph of that. And so amazing stuff. And so Jonesy was really good at evoking these places and the atmosphere. And I just found like I was in these streets with him. He talked about as a little boy, he wanted to be a studio musician. And he didn't get his dad to set it up for him. He went down to this street in London where all the musicians would congregate, called Archer Street, which is in Soho.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be like, "You need a bass player, you need a drummer," like this. And he's there with these grizzled old session musicians, this little kid with his bass guitar. And he gets a gig playing with one of the Shadows, Tony Meehan. And so I remember thinking with him, he was very effective at giving you a feel of places, what atmospheres were like. And so you see in the film, he's the one that really is quite evocative about being in that room in that first rehearsal.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, there's all this equipment and it's like, he's so-and-so, meet so-and-so. So I thought he was brilliant because he made me feel like I was in these rooms, in these studios.
At the end of that first meeting with him, did you get the sense this could happen?
He said at the end of it, he said, he's been very engaging through the whole time, but he didn't make any comment on the overall film. And he just looks at me and he had this sort of half smile and somewhat impassive expression. And he looks, he goes, "By the way, this is me excited. When can we start?"
Wow. Amazing. So next is Robert.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
So Robert was the only person that was aware of us. We were on his radar, as I said, through American Epic. The person that really got me started in the entertainment business was Brian Eno. I was working on a multimedia project called Towering Inferno. And Brian Eno, I'd gone to see him and asked for his help, which he very, very kindly extended to us. And it was a very important thing about the Holocaust. I was the only Gentile in an all-Jewish production. And Brian lent enormous support and guidance to help get this thing. And I got the soundtrack signed to Island Records. And Brian recommended, I said, look, he said, you need an experienced person helping you navigate getting in funding for this and doing. So he recommended this amazing manager called David James, who managed Jar Wobble and all these people like this. And Justin was a member of Invaders of the Heart, Jar Wobble's band, Justin Adams. So these were the guys that got me into the business on the music side. And so Justin and I had stayed in touch through David James. And Justin then had become Robert's musical director for many, many albums and years. They were very close. And all those wonderful things where they were going and playing in the desert and stuff like this, that was all with Justin. Because Justin's area is, like Robert's, hugely broad in that musical area. So Justin had been telling him about these guys he knew that were tramping around the South and had found photographs of Henry Thomas, photographs of such and such. So occasionally, I think some of these things we were finding that I was texting Justin were being passed on to Robert. So we'd met Jimmy, we'd met Jonesy, and the next thing was to meet Robert. And I was just reaching out to each of them individually in just whatever seemed to be the easiest order. And I didn't say when I made the meeting, I've met with so-and-so. And normally at the end of the presentation, I think Jonesy might have said, you seen Jimmy? I said, yeah, I saw him last week. Is he in? I went, yeah, he's in. And he goes, and so it was like that. So Robert had just begun a tour. And one of the first dates on the tour was in Perth, Scotland, which is where my producer Alison McGaughty's family are. And so we went up there and Justin Adams put us on the guest list of the show. And so we come backstage and it's this big old theatre full of people. But wonderfully, for some reason, no one had been given backstage passes apart from us. It was like a dream, basically. So we're on our own, the backstage, Justin, and Robert strolls in and comes and gives this really warm greeting and sort of says, I just want to say how much I've enjoyed American Epic. The films are amazing, the book and everything like this, all this wonderful stuff. And he turns to me and he says, what are you going to do next? So I said, funny you mentioned that. We'd like to do you, Led Zeppelin. And he sort of looks at me like somewhat like blankly. And I brought like a piece of archive. I thought I would never dream of pitching someone a film at an after show. Yeah. But I think I brought something like a piece of proof of where that first rehearsal was. I think I got some paperwork. Because it's always been a source of mystery. It's on Gerrard Street. That's been, there's been some people that speculate, but it's generally was understood it was on Gerrard Street in Soho, which is Chinatown now. But the exact building, until we did this film, has been lost in the midst of time. So I had some piece of research that I'd found that indicated the address of where that was. And he was like, I could see his eyebrow raise. And then we just changed the subject. And we chatted about lots of things and stuff like that, super friendly. Yeah. And at the end of the evening, he just, he shook hands and said goodbye to Alison and me. And then he went out of the room and he stuck his head back in the door and he goes, I know your game and I'm interested. Meet me in Sheffield. So a few days later, we went down to a show in Fresh Sheffield. And we met him there, had this really nice chat, but he had loads of people backstage there. And then he sort of said, at the end of the evening, he said, meet me in Los Angeles, which is where I live. So this is like, I don't know, a week or two later, we're back in Los Angeles and we go to see him at the Orpheum. And this wonderful concert, really, really memorable show. And what was quite good was actually, I really loved the concert he was playing. It was like a fantastic concert. I was going to read this version of Bluebirds Over the Mountain, which is a terrific show. So I was getting to see these shows, each of these missions to watch the show before meeting him. But I really enjoyed that show. So it was kind of very memorable, that whole thing. But if you go backstage in Los Angeles, there must be like 200 people there. And he comes in and says a quick, polite hello. And he talks to every single person in the room. Really politely goes to them all. So it's like 2 hours later. And eventually I said to Alison, oh, we should go. So Anthony says, no, stay. And eventually everyone's gone. It's this giant room and he's standing against one wall with his manager, Nicola, and we're at the other wall. And then he just walks over and comes over and says, are we going to do this? And I said, yeah. And he goes, meet me in Birmingham. So we go on a plane, we go to Birmingham. And then God bless him, he walks into the hotel and standing next to him is Pat Bonham.
Wow.
And so I thought, you lovely man, you've spoken to Pat, you've told her about who we are. You haven't been pitched the film, but you obviously take.
He understood.
Yeah, it was heartwarming. He'd called her up and said, we should come to this. And I just sat down and went through it. And she was so lovely. She came with this pile of photographs, that had never been seen before of John Bonham. Yeah. All these images. And they chatted through. And when Robert saw the story He was really funny, and I just saw this side of him I'd never seen in the media before. So open, like kind of wanting to be understood. And we're going through the story, and I remember you could see his spirits raise when he saw it went up to 1970.
Yeah.
That was when it ended. And I kind of mentioned this with him, and he said, "This is so wonderful because this was a really wonderful time for me."
Yes.
He said it was before it was all kind of formalized being into it. So he said, we're playing to these wonderful hippie girls dancing. And he said, and there was no plan. We were just winging it, you know? Now, of course, Jimmy had a plan, but it was this energy.
Understood.
And I totally got it. I think he saw, yes, this
And
film.
even though Jimmy had a plan, there's no telling what's going to happen.
Absolutely. There's no telling. So for this was all the exciting. So I brought a little piece of paper up that was said, like, I think I got it here. I brought this little piece of paper up that was like, we're going to do this film, you know, kind of thing, so I could have something. No law or anything like that. He just signed it straight away with Pat.
This is incredible.
Yeah.
This is incredible.
Yeah. He was like, I'm in.
Wow.
Great guy. So then we set up the interviews, and we have a meeting with all of them, all three of them together.
And how's that? And how are they different together versus independently?
Well, you know that rhythm that you have that people like, they just have, it's all of us, you know, when we have like, if you put me in the room with my brother and my dad, I'm going to talk differently than if I'm on my own.
Absolutely.
So it's no different from any of those things. You just get a slightly different rhythm to the people, you know? One person might be quieter than they are when they're with you.
Yes.
Another person might be louder. Yes, it was one of those things that it's very, when you make documentary films, this is very common.
Yes. Tell me the differences, though. Tell me in the group meeting what was different.
Well, I mean, this is a meeting to really formally decide, are we going to do this film kind of thing? Are we going to allow you to make this film? In a sense, you can't make a documentary about someone without their permission to use the music.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in terms of that meeting, what was really cool about it was that they agreed that the film and supported the film, we should have complete artistic freedom to make the film. So collectively, they agreed that. And I thought that was unprecedented in terms of like an act of that magnitude.
Yes.
And so they never altered a frame of the film. And so they're not producers of the film. But it was very personable. They're very individually very entertaining and charming people to be with. But when I was with the three of them together, that was the first time I had this sense of like, this is like a major organization. There was something about the gravitas of the three of them in the room together.
Probably even for them.
Yeah. I mean, those meetings are rare, as I understand it, you know. It was very kind of them to organize that, you know. So, yeah, you felt like you were at a summit meeting of like almost these three countries or something.
Very cool.
It was very, so that was the point. So it was like, you know, when they agreed to this artistic freedom and they were like, yeah, you make it. Looking back on it, what I thought was really ingenious, I mean, we required it, but it wasn't like something we had to kind of like push for. What was really smart about it is that when they made a decision as a group that they were going to do something, and as you know, the last one was the O2. So these are very rare, these things. And that's one of the wonderful things about Led Zeppelin. They're not like pushing product down people's throats. They let the music stand for itself, as I see it. What I thought was really great about it is they put all the onus on you, the filmmaker, because you go, I'm in this place that no one's allowed to be in to make this film, and they've given me the freedom to make it. So it better be bloody good, you know, because you've got no one to blame by yourself if it's not working.
Yeah.
I thought that was, on so many levels, it's smart, you know? And so we set about putting the thing together, and then we did the interviews with them. And first, the other thing that's worth mentioning is they have incredible memories, like way better than mine, like astonishingly good memories. Don't forget, I've done 175 background interviews with everyone from Vic Flick to Glyn Johns to, you know, Rev Gordon Bates.
Yes. None of which is in the movie. It's just the information you need to make the movie.
Yes.
only voices in the movie are the band
Are them
members
because
and the music.
they're alive apart from John, and
Yes.
so let the audience. They've agreed to let them talk. Don't interrupt them and tell the story. I knew after meeting them, I thought they're reliable witnesses. So I said 8 months of. I was obviously very familiar with Led Zeppelin before,
Yes.
but I've done 8 months of hardcore research. And so I'm aware when I'm talking to someone if they're a credible witness. You know, do they remember things correctly?
How did you find the Bonham audio interviews?
So I started thinking, well, if we have all three of them talking, we have to have John in there. And I thought, God, this is a high bar because he was super press wary. And so I thought, I've got to try and track down something with him talking. And I remember Robert saying, because I think I said to them, I want to have John to have an equal presence. And I remember Robert saying, how are you going to do that? It's like, I don't recall hearing anything of him talking more than a few sentences. And I said, we'll find it. And I think he said something like, well, he did American Epic, I guess. He found all that stuff from the 20s. So,
Yeah.
you know. So how I did that was I tracked down every interview that John had done in the print media and anywhere else. And I contacted all the journalists, most of whom were alive, and said, did you have a tape? And in most cases, they either done shorthand or they discarded the tape or whatever it been. And eventually I'm talking to Sam Rapallo, who runs the Led Zeppelin website, who's a huge repository of like Led Zeppelin material. And he passes on this bootleg recording of an interview with Robert and John. And it's like a really good interview. It's a short excerpt, but it's excellent journalism. And the sound quality was not good enough to use in the kind of film we make for a cinema. It was like third or fourth generation, but I could tell it was originally from a 1/4-inch tape. And I could tell it was also a radio journalist because he was not talking over them, and he had an Australian accent. And so I contacted the University of Canberra in Australia, which is where radio tapes in Australia, that's where they get sent if someone can be bothered to send them in. Unfortunately, the University of Canberra had done a giant American Epic Festival. So they were helpful.
You had a relationship.
So I had a relationship. So I sent through the tape, an excerpt of the tape with the journalist speaking and saying, can you identify who this is? And they identified him as this journalist from a Sydney radio station. And he was a stringer that had obviously been doing this interview in advance of their first Australian tour. I went to the radio station. They said, we don't have that tape. So I went back to the University of Canberra and said, has this tape ever been sent to you? And they looked and they went, no, we don't have it. And then before I put the phone down, I said, how many unmarked reels do you have? And they went, thousands. Because doing Epic, I'd found that with the Library of Congress and these things, there are pallets of stuff that get bequeathed to them that they receive, but it can take years to process that material. So they said thousands of unmarked reels. And so I persuaded them to start looking through the unmarked reels. And I think it was a couple of months later, I got a phone call and they said, go to your email like that. And I opened up the email and there was a MP3 transfer. And it was that interview, and it sounded bloody amazing.
Wow.
And so I persuaded them to send the reel in to our endpoint audio, where our engineer, Nick Berg, and we transferred it. It was fantastic. And it was just like the dream interview. So many comments from him that other band members hadn't said.
Wow.
And then after that, we found 2 other American interviews that just discovered shorter ones.
Amazing.
And between those 3, there he was.
Yes.
And as I said, he was never doubling up what the rest of the band said. And he was talking about all these things in the moment. I remember Jimmy sort of saying, he said, in a funny sort of way, he's like the star of the show, isn't he? Because he said, he's right there in the moment. Because his interview was so close to the events when they're happening. So he's fresh and he's got all these perspectives. So those were the elements that came together. And when the band turned up to do the interviews, I said, all of them turned up with bags of photographs and sound recordings, everything I'd never seen before. So Robert turns up with all these pictures of him from his different groups and his bands, but also a lacquer of this track that him and John Bonham in their group, Robert Plant and the Band of Joy, called Memory Lane, that they'd written together. And no one had ever heard that before.
So cool.
Yeah. And so he said, there you go, have this. And all of them, John Paul Jones, I think this is interesting with Zeppelin. That's all I'll say. I mean, I don't want to speak for them, but what I did notice, and the lesson I say to kids, when they go for it, they go for it.
Yes.
They do it properly. They don't hold back. And I think there's those interviews in the film, they're super candid. Those are people really telling you what they feel.
Where did the footage come from of the live performances?
I searched everywhere bar the Mariana Trench for any existing footage. So there were 2 or 3 known performances that were filmed from that time, and a lot of material that isn't been seen before. But there were 2 or 3 known performances. The first thing I would do is I would track down the filmmakers or whoever had filmed it, and I'd go to those facilities, and I'd go through and get all the rushes and the original elements. So with this film, everything you see on the screen has been in our hands. So, like here. So this is the actual negative for the performance of Dazed and Confused.
Amazing.
This is what comes into our hands. So we have all these pieces. Back in the days of the 40s and 50s, sound was like one of the highest priorities in the Hollywood movies, and really hence the enormous attendance figures that movies used to have then. Now sound is kind of a bit of an afterthought in films. And so when we get these films in here, what we're doing is we're transferring the original film. We're able to do really high quality scans. But what makes this difference is that Nick Berg is probably one of the best transfer engineer on the planet for pulling audio off all these different mediums, because he did the American Epic film. So he didn't just learn how to transfer 78. He has the original recording system. Each era of Hollywood, he has all the original mixing desks. We were working on the mixing desk that they mixed Oklahoma on.
I see.
Yeah. And so he understands all that material. He's able to record this stuff going in, and so he knows what he's meant to be hearing when he's getting the original mags or the elements, what's meant to be coming out. And so, I experienced that when we were using the original 1920s recording kit for American Epic. I suddenly knew how the 78s were meant to sound because I was making them. I was making them with Willie Nelson and Nas and Jack White. I could hear what these things are meant to sound like. So when I would get the 78s from the 20s, I would know what was a product of deficiencies on that disc, as opposed to what the actual wax disc it was cut to sounded like. So all these things you get to learn from
every medium brings something to the recording, positive or negative.
Correct.
It always does something. Like we fetishize vinyl because it sounds so good, but it doesn't sound like what the tape sounds like. It sounds like vinyl.
Exactly right. And so that's the fundamental thing of the movie when you watch it, is actually what you're listening to. So with Led Zeppelin's support, we have access to master tapes, remasters of the Zeppelin material. But from Epic, I also started listening to the original discs. And I remember thinking, what are we going to give the public? As you mentioned, when you make a record,
sounds different.
Yeah. There are 3 steps in that process. You have your 1/4-inch master that Glyn Johns and Jimmy mixed down in Olympic for Led Zeppelin 1.
Mm-hmm.
Then that goes to Atlantic and a production master's made. And various things are done to that tape to get it ready for being cut. Then stage 3, a lacquer is cut by a George Pyrrhus or a Bob Ludwig. And that has a huge amount of stuff done to it, as you know. So in the case of, say, Zeppelin 2, Bob Ludwig hugely goosed that cutting of that record so that it has this extraordinary sound. In fact, that record is so loud that after they pressed the first, 250,000 of them, they were getting complaints from people that had cheap turntables because the needle is moving. When you play a record, the volume is created by the needle moving more violently. So you have more dramatic peaks and troughs for the needle to be passing through, and that creates the volume. And so in a cheap record player, the needle will jump out. And so that Ludwig cut is like magical. And so I started assembling all these records. I brought a few here to show you.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the original Ludwig, this was sealed when I bought it. So I had to buy a whole bunch of these, what appeared to be very first pressings sealed, hoping that there would be one of the Ludwig versions in there. And then similarly, this is like the legendary, first turquoise pressing of Zeppelin 1. But my favorite version when I was playing it is this version here. Not
Did
this
you
one.
A/B the sound on all
Oh,
of them?
we had masses of copies of these records.
But I'm saying you would pick based on what sounded good, not based on what you thought was
What sounded good.
reported to be the best.
Yes.
You always went by what
Always
sounded
by
best.
ear. So yeah, with these records, what you have here is in America, I think there are 4 pressing plants that are pressing Zeppelin 1. And each of them have different cutting engineers, all approaching, and this tape is a tricky tape. There's some azimuth issues on Zeppelin 1, the production master that was made by Atlantic. And so they're trying to work correct for this. And so all these lacquer cuts are very different, and the British one's different. So we must have had about, I don't know, 16, 17 versions of
What were you playing them back on?
Oh, we were at Endpoint, probably the best playbacks of Lathe on the planet, you know?
Yeah.
And so we're going through these, and what I noticed is these original records, they have a quality to them. There's a quality to the sound. I went, this is what the public heard. This is what excited the public. And I thought, why don't we, in this film, give the public what they heard in 1969, but on the best copy of that disc on planet Earth, played back on the best hi-fi on planet Earth.
Which is not hearable other than in your movie today.
Yeah.
You can't hear this.
Yeah, you can't hear this. But it's the truest sound to what was originally intended. Because, of course, when these were made, when Jimmy's and the band are in the studio making these records, they completely know that the end point is that disc.
Yes.
The master tape is not going to be distributed.
No.
And in fact, the master tape is made knowing in mind that all these things are going to be done to it.
Yes.
So in the case of this example here, Led Zeppelin 2, this is this extraordinary cut by Robert Ludwig, which I remember Jimmy saying to me, this is the way to hear Zeppelin 2, is this particular pressing.
Wow.
Now, this is made at one of the plants called Presswell. Atlantic were notorious for using bad, impure vinyl to save money. So Atlantic pressings are traditionally quite noisy. So this one here happened to be what we call a really good clean puck, and it's in one of the best pressing plants. And so this one was incredibly clean copy. So what we did is we're presenting this, and this is in the film, with no equalization, no compression. All we've done is if there's any minor clicks in the transfer, they're manually removed. So you're hearing the music the way it was intended the day it came out, and we're serving it to you like a pineapple cut off the tree in Kauai, sliced in half and put on your plate. That's what we're doing musically.
And it sounds, I've been listening to Led Zeppelin music for as long as it's been around, and I've never heard it sound like it sounds in the movie, and it's thrilling. It is thrilling, breathtaking. So
thank you.
However you did it, it worked.
So for me, when you hear the recordings that are the studio recordings like Little Richard and Johnny Bennett, you're again hearing the original disc was those original lacquer cuts as they were done. And if you know a bit about like early recording, those 50s records, like the Chess records, you know, Howling Wolf and things like that, or the early rock and roll records, those cutting engineers were applying reverb as the lacquer was being cut. So when you listen to the original Chuck Berry records from the 50s, that's the only way you'll hear that original sound is getting the original records. You can't.
They were also sped up often with the Chuck Berry records.
Yeah, you're right. Yes, I'd forgotten about that. Yeah.
Because they wanted Chuck's voice to sound younger.
yeah.
So they sped up the record.
So there's this enormous amount of like artistry that goes into cutting those records that 50, 60 years later, you can't get back to. So what I'm interested in the film is if you want to make a 2-hour film about Led Zeppelin and you think a film about Led Zeppelin is worth an audience spending $20 and sitting in a cinema for 2 hours, do not mess with the music. And so my view is we're all here because of this music. So give it to the audience in the purest form you possibly can. And when I go through all the variables, I go, the purest form is what you would have heard the day it came out. When they approved on that test pressing, I went, okay, that's fine. That's the finished article that the public heard. So I'm giving it to you on a system. A copy in a system is beyond anything you could own domestically. If you're doing this story that takes you from 1944 through to when they meet in 68, you're hearing each of those pieces of music that influenced them or that they played on, like Goldfinger.
Yeah.
You're hearing those records as they were cut in 56, as they were cut in 62, as they were cut in 65. So you're hearing the exact sound of how those records were envisaged in each of those years, so that you're taking a musical journey through time, a recording journey through time in the film.
There was a damaged piece of film of Jimmy playing acoustic guitar. Where did that come from?
He appeared on a BBC TV show called The Julie Felix Show, and she was like a folk singer. They had 2 tape machines recording the performance, one of which there was some grit or something on the head of the machine, and so the recording was damaged as it was being made. The other copy was lost years ago. We have searched high and low for that everywhere, not turned up. So all that survived was that damaged tape. But the sound was undamaged. The sound is phenomenal.
Yes.
And so I went to see Melissa Quintus, who's one of the VFX artists for James Cameron and Avatar. And she did some restoration work on film footage for American Epic. And I presented this to her and I said, look, we can't afford the budgets of Avatar, but would you in your downtime look and see if you can improve this? And she very kindly spent months and months in the few hours she had off making Avatar, Way of the Water or whatever. She would tinker with this and just literally frame by frame try and paint out the worst of the lines that were running across it. And what she did is, compared to the original tape, is a miracle. You know, the original tape would induce like, an epileptic fit or something watching it.
Yeah.
So she did a phenomenal job. So there's no AI whatsoever in the film. Anything we've done is old school. But what was very touching about it is I remember screening the film for Jimmy before the restoration was done. Sometimes you do these screenings for the group, just in case someone watches something and goes, oh, I've actually got a photograph of that, And he watched it, and I remember he turned to me and goes, I do hope that stays in the film, that clip. He says, because I imagine when you sell this film, there'll be probably people who try and tell you to take it out. Because it was very damaged then.
It's still damaged, but it's one of the highlights of the film. It's so out of context of anything we've seen of Jimmy playing. We've never seen anything like that. Sitting down with an acoustic guitar and killing it, which he does.
Yeah.
It's breathtaking.
Thanks. Yeah, and that's that folk side, that folk Eastern side. Yeah.
What's the first time you got to see the film on a big screen?
Directors Guild. I did a rough cut of the film, tail end of the pandemic, and the only way we could screen it in front of an audience was to submit it to the Venice Film Festival, and it wasn't finished, but they accepted it, and we opened the festival with it, and I took it to the Directors Guild Theatre in Hollywood, and I screened it on that giant screen.
And what was the experience for you?
Oh, mind-blowing. All the work that we put in getting all those original prints, all the original sound, that's when you see it blown up, makes it all worthwhile. But the thing that was the most mind-blowing was that I took the film went to New York, and I went with Sony Pictures Classics and screened the film for Tom Bernard, who runs that company, and his team. He's like the old Hollywood bosses that I read about in David Niven's book. I didn't think people like him exist anymore. They're like shoot from the hip kind of guys. No marketing plans, just like do it, And if they're in, and they go for it. So I screened the film for him, and I just made some comment, and he went, okay, we want to do this, And he had seen Zeppelin live at the Texas Pop Festival in '69, and his head of sales, a guy called Tom Prassis, had seen the film. That's the guy that sells the film to all the theaters. He'd seen Zeppelin on that first tour. So what are the chances you're with a studio where the 2 key guys had been to see the group in that period that the film's covering, that early period. So I knew we were in the right place. And I just turned to Tom and I said, hey, it'll be really cool, I think, with this. I don't like this normal thing where you ram stuff down people's throats and there's posters everywhere, this giant marketing thing. That's so un-Zeppelin as well. It'd be really cool if the film was introduced like Zeppelin were back then. Like it just comes in the underground on the West Coast and gradually word of mouth spreads. And he took that idea and he ran with it. And he called up and he said, oh, you need to go and screen it for IMAX. And he'd approached IMAX because IMAX have, I don't know, just a limited number of cinemas around America. I don't know if it's like 500 or something like that they've got. And so we turn up to IMAX and I have to screen the film, test screen it at IMAX before all the heads of IMAX watch it. I never in my wildest dreams imagined that our movie would be on in IMAX. And I'm sitting watching it and it comes up on the screen. And I was like, Jesus, this was made for IMAX.
It really was.
And I remember, this is where music films live, is in IMAX. Because you know what it's like, Rick? When you have a musical things, you kind of want to be in that world.
Yes.
So your dream is to be inside the biggest speaker system and to be completely enveloped. No one wants to listen to music through a tinny transistor, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You want to hear it big. So I'm in there. And of course, all that work, we killed ourselves to get our hands on every single film print, every photograph. And everything's scanned at this extraordinary high level so it could be literally projected on the Empire State Building, you know? And so when I'm getting into IMAX, I was going, thank God we did all that work, because you can blow this thing up, huge. So I'm watching it in there, and amazingly, IMAX said, we'll do it. So what he'd done, which was clever, is we ended up having this exclusive run in IMAX. So it's a limited number of cinemas. And the whole opening 2 days sold out.
Amazing.
So it was like it's the way Zeppelin was launched. He didn't set up a single review or anything like that, no media. He just invited a bunch of interesting people to come down and watch it in IMAX. These are musicians and film people. And there was no instructions, don't post on social media. So they just literally told their friends. So that's how the word of the film got out. It was not done through any campaign. It was just like, play it to a bunch of people and they told other people.
And how is it doing so far?
I'm kind of embarrassed to say in a way, but I mean, IMAX said it's their most successful music release of all time.
Wow. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And it deserves it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I mean, what I'm hearing is a lot of people going to see the film 2, 3, 4 times.
Well, it's like you listen to Led Zeppelin 2 a million times. Why wouldn't you go see the movie over and over? Makes perfect sense.
Do you know that's the funny thing about the film? Obviously, I'm working intensely in Zeppelin 1 and Zeppelin 2. I'll confide here what my hope was. When I made the film, that's why you've got these full songs and there's so much work on just giving you the pure sound. You know the way you get a fix and there's something you want to hear and you have a hankering to listen to, I don't know, it might be Beyonce or Howling Wolf or the New York Dolls or whatever it might be, or the Beastie Boys. I thought if you have that yen once a month to go to early Zeppelin 1 and 2, I thought I'd love if I could make a film that could equally fulfill that yen.
Yes.
So if I want to go into that zone, I could go, well, I could put the albums on and blast them, or I could watch this film for 2 hours and get all that music with the visuals and everything accompany it. And that could be an equally appealing pop proposition.
Absolutely. The communication breakdown footage is incredible because the reception is so nonplussed. Tell me about when did you first see that footage?
One of the tenets of the story, I mean, it is a journey to America. This is an American Quest. So as you said, it's like in Britain and Europe, initially, a certain audience had been nonplussed by Zeppelin and did not know what to make of them. So I came across this footage that had been shot for this French show called Tout en Scène. And when I looked at the footage, I thought, I've got to go to the facility, the Tout en Scène archives. And I went there and I got all the rushes for this and some footage that hadn't been seen before. Everything was shot. So if you look at the film, if there's a performance that is in the movie that has been seen, a number of people have spotted this already, it's completely recut with different camera angles.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not watching anything that is in a form that has been seen before.
Yes.
So we've looked at it as like film directors going, but this is a Hollywood movie. I would be hitting him, the bass player, on this cue. The broadcasters missed the cues.
Yes.
You know? And you see it all the time.
Yes.
The singer starts singing, they're still looking at the drummer. You know what I mean? So we are using the footage to correct for anything like that. So you're getting this super impactful performance. So I was going through the rushes and I noticed these kids in the audience with their fingers in their ears.
Yeah.
And there's a woman with a baby in her arms. She's holding her baby and she's next to her husband. And the band are blaring away and she's just shaking her head in just horror.
People look bored.
Yeah, they're completely bored.
Amazing.
And the band are they're going for it, aren't they? They're going like gangbusters.
Yeah.
So what I was able to do was I was able to get these additional camera angles where I could pan across the audience. And if you look how it's cut, I've got other camera angles from behind the group, which confirm those kids with their fingers in there, they're still there.
Yes.
So particularly on IMAX, you can see that it's not
You can
fudged.
see what the band is seeing, the
You can
lack
see
of
what they're-
reaction.
Yeah, exactly. And so what was wonderful about it was like this perfect thing. It was like the whole film is constructed like a Hollywood musical in that the songs are used to advance the story. So they're not getting it over. What are they singing? Communication breakdown. You know, when Jimmy goes to try and get the deal in America, what are you hearing? Your time is going to come.
Yeah.
So all the songs are kind of chosen to work this way. But the thing in the film that was the joy was in terms of getting the story across is, so they're playing for this European audience with their fingers in their ears that aren't getting it. Then they get on the plane and they go to the west coast of America, which is where Jimmy had envisaged this was where this group was going to take off. And he saw that as the future. You know, this was where it was about, these long shows, albums, not singles, in all this business. And he's on his way out there. When they get to the Fillmore, and this is the thing Jimmy told me when I first presented to him, he goes, it's all about that Fillmore show. We had this warm-up show in LA, but we were all sick with flu. At the Whiskey A Go-Go. But he said the Fillmore was the make or break show. And he said, if that show hadn't worked, it wouldn't have happened. This was where it happened. And he said, because we were hitting dead center in the counterculture.
Yeah.
And it was like, here it is. And the word would have spread out one way or the other. And it was like, boom. And then interestingly, totally independently, Robert Plant said to me, he said that Peter Grant had come up to him before the show and he said, you better be good tonight, he said, because if you don't cut it here, it's over. That's in the film, Robert says that.
Amazing.
You know, so it was all on that show. And so what's brilliant, what are they playing there? Communication breakdown the second time. You normally wouldn't use a song twice, but that version.
It tells a story.
Yeah, it tells a it's ferocious.
Yes.
It's absolutely almost Ramones intensity performance.
Yeah.
And it gets over.
How would you say each of the band members deal with the legacy of Led Zeppelin?
You know, it's interesting. I mean, this isn't for me to speak for them. What is for me is to put across in a film what they're telling me. And what they're telling me is also informed as a filmmaker by, as I said, 175 background interviews. I'm trying to be in a position when Robert Plant says one sentence to me in a 5-hour interview, I know that's important because I've spoken to all the people he grew up with. We don't often deliver some of our most important things in giant monologues. Sometimes one passing comment might allude to an enormously important thing. So you have to do that background to know what you're listening to.
Yes.
And that background is, you can be talking to me and we're speaking English, but unless I really have looked into your background, for example, I don't necessarily understand everything you're telling me. I've got to know what you mean, you know?
Yeah.
And so if I've done that research, hopefully, when you're telling me something. So I think in terms of this, my sense of it was, off the top of my head, these guys strike me as musicians, professional musicians, first and foremost. I've no sense of that this was done for self-aggrandizement or to make money. I think the principal motivator was to make music and to try and make music in the least messed with way possible, to have the ability to pursue these ideas in the purest form, in a collaborative, collective whole. Yeah. There's a point where John Paul Jones in the film says, when he gets to Pangbourne, they're all about to start rehearsing properly. And he goes, we didn't want to be on TV. We just wanted to make music really badly.
And that might have been different than a lot of other bands at that time.
I think it's very different from a lot of other bands. Because a lot of other bands, they all know each other. So they've all sat in front of the TV set and watched the Beatles come on the Ed Sullivan Show, or they've gone to see the Sex Pistols, or whatever their entry point is, or Black Flag, or whatever it might be. And there's this element of like, you know, posing in front of the mirror with your hairbrush, singing, you know, and reading about these things in magazines. What's interesting about these guys is that you have two of them that are so fundamental, are seriously professionals. Even though they're so young, they're professional studio musicians. And John Paul Jones was telling me his day was get up super early in the morning, go to, say, Abbey Road or wherever, and I think the first session might have been as early as 8 a.m., and that was jingles. Then there would be 3 sessions a day, and your session was considered total failure unless you got 3 songs fully in the can. I've never asked why it was 3. You thought it would be 2 for a single, it was 3. So whether it was The Who, The Kinks, or Lulu, 3 songs, and that's in a 3-hour session. And you have 3 of those a day. Then he was writing arrangements, and so he would go home at night and be up until the small hours writing arrangements for the next day or the day after. Some driver would pick those up. Then he'd be off crack of dawn. Mad hours. And he was doing that, I think, like 6 days a week.
Professionals.
Serious professionals. So you've got half of Led Zeppelin coming in as that.
Yeah.
Then you have 2 other guys coming in that are really like the beating hearts of the band, because they're from the West Midlands. So that's the home of Shakespeare. That's the home of Tolkien. So that's in those guys' bloods. I mean, that's the epicenter of British culture, where Robert and John Bonham come from. Uh-huh. People in Britain, London, where I grew up, will try and tell you not, but it is. When you go there, you go, this is our wellspring here, up there. Yep. Anyway, these guys are coming in. They had worked so hard. From the mid-teens, they are every day out there trying to get gigs, playing gigs, meeting in bands, all this business. So when they get their first, I mean, Robert had made singles. He'd gone into London, made singles, but there were brief moments this would happen, and then the single wouldn't be promoted or it wouldn't take off.
And he's 19.
So when he comes in to this room with this 24-year-old and 23-year-old top studio musicians, I think the way that Led Zeppelin operated a music group was shaped by the experienced session guys.
Yeah.
Like, as John Paul Jones said, it was like, you don't arrange songs in a studio. You come knowing exactly what you're going to. Studio time is money. You come in and you've got it worked out. So my sense of it with them is like, despite the extraordinary flamboyance of the music and the wildness of it, the abiding feeling I have of this is that these are like kind of like master craftsmen.
Yeah.
And it's hard to reconcile that with the appearance and the long hair and the thing.
Yeah.
And this was like a gig. This was a music gig. It just happened to be a music gig that was enormously successful. Yeah. More importantly, enormously influential.
Yes.
I think that's the thing that's probably more important to them, if I had to guess, was that it was influential. So I got the impression it was all about music with them, which is why the film, and probably a little book I read made me feel like this is why the film is very focused on the music and the making of the music, is because in the time I had the pleasure of spending in their company, no one ever talked about money or awards or anything like that. None of that stuff came out. I just didn't seem to register at all. It's all about music.
Yeah.
I think that's probably what's been the huge missing part of the story. And, is that the fundamental part is it was done for music. And it's very telling when Jonesy says that comment, like, we wanted to play music really bad. How many people say that? I don't think most people say that. I don't hear people in interviews saying that, I just wanted to play music really bad. They're not really like anyone else that I've encountered.
Tetragrammaton is a podcast. Tetragrammaton is a website. Tetragrammaton is a whole world of knowledge.
What may fall within the sphere of Tetragrammaton? Counterculture? Tetragrammaton. Sacred geometry? Tetragrammaton. The avant-garde? Tetragrammaton. Generative art? Tetragrammaton. The tarot? Tetragrammaton. Out-of-print music? Tetragrammaton. Biodynamics? Tetragrammaton. Graphic design? Tetragrammaton. Mythology and magic? Tetragrammaton. Obscure film? Tetragrammaton. Beach culture? Tetragrammaton. Esoteric lectures? Tetragrammaton. Off-the-grid living? Tetragrammaton. Alt spirituality? Tetragrammaton. The canon of fine objects? Tetragrammaton. Muscle cars? Tetragrammaton. Ancient wisdom for a new age. Upon entering, experience the artwork of the day. Take a breath and see where you are drawn.